My husband said he was in Dallas. Then I heard a woman's voice in the background while my water was breaking on the kitchen floor. That is not how I expected my marriage to end. I thought it would end in a lawyer's office, maybe. Or in a fight so ugly one of us finally said the thing we had been circling for years. I thought there would be shouting, or tears, or at least the dignity of a slow collapse. Instead, it ended with me on my knees in my kitchen, one hand braced against the cabinet, the other pressed between my legs because something warm had just broken loose beneath me, and my husband saying, in that smooth, careful voice he used when he wanted me to stop asking questions, "I'm sorry, babe. I'm stuck in Dallas. Stuck in Dallas." I remember staring at the tile. White tile, faint gray veining, the kind I had picked because I liked the calm of it. I remember how the water spread, how it found the grout lines and made little rivers, and how my brain, for one weird second, tried to stay domestic, clean up the floor, call the hospital, breathe. Then I heard it again, a woman. Not close enough for me to make out the words, but close enough that she was definitely there. Close enough that she had said something to him, and he had covered the phone with his hand the way a guilty person does in movies before they've learned how obvious that move is. I closed my eyes. I did not cry. I did not scream. I have always hated the way people assume silence means surrender. Sometimes silence is just what happens when a woman realizes she has crossed into a room she cannot leave the same way she entered it. "Daniel," I said. He said, "What? Elena, babe, I told you. The client thing is bad, flights are delayed. I'm trying to get on the earliest one." His voice was too fast. That was the first thing. Not the lie. Lies are common enough. It was the speed of it, the extra softness. The way he made the sentence round at the edges. Like he was trying to cushion me from the truth before I had even been given a chance to feel it. Another tightening hit my body, low and heavy and sudden enough to make me grip the counter harder. I bent forward and waited it out. "I need you to listen to me," I said. "Of course. Are you alone?" A pause. Just long enough to be a decision. "Yes." I looked at the puddle on the floor. I thought about how my body had always known things before my mouth was ready to say them. That had happened with the twins too. The exhaustion that wouldn't leave. The nausea that felt wrong. The strange little flutter of certainty I had started getting in the second month, long before the doctor confirmed 2 heartbeats instead of 1. And now this. This one I knew in my bones too. "No," I said quietly. He sighed, the way men do when they want your suspicion to feel unreasonable. "Elena, don't do this right now. I'm 2 hours from the airport. 2 hours. I was an accountant." Matter to me. Timing matters. Distance matters. Patterns matter. And right there, with my body splitting open around pain, I could feel the shape of the lie already. Dallas was not 2 hours away if he had been where he said he was. Dallas was not a thing you could leave from in the middle of a work emergency and be back for dinner if the clouds behaved. Dallas was a city, not a hallway. And then the woman on the other end of the line said something clearly this time. "Who is calling? Not my husband. Not baby. Not babe. Who is calling?" I remember the cold that went through me so hard it almost made the pain disappear. Because I knew that voice. Not in the way people know a celebrity voice from television. Not in the way you know a neighbor's laugh through a wall. I knew it in the deeper place. The place where your body stores familiarity before your mind is allowed to name it. I knew that voice from Sunday dinners, from weddings, from family photos where everyone stood close enough to pretend they were warm. My sister-in-law, Meredith. I did not say her name out loud. I just listened to Daniel breathe. Then I said, very softly, "Put her on speaker." He laughed once too quickly. "What are you talking about? There's nobody here." That was almost impressive. Almost. Another contraction rolled through me and I had to shut my eyes against it. The sound I made was small, involuntary, and humiliating. Not because pain is humiliating, but because I had spent my entire adult life being the woman who handled pain like it was a spreadsheet error. Quietly, efficiently, without making anyone else uncomfortable. This pain was different. It was bigger than pride. When it passed, I was sweating. "Daniel," I said, "I'm at home. Something is happening." "What do you mean, something?" My water broke. Silence. For one heartbeat, maybe 2. There was nothing on the line. No fake concern, no soothing tone, nothing at all. Then he said, "Are you sure?" That was the second thing. Not "Are you okay?" Not "Do you need me?" Not "I'm on my way." "Are you sure?" I stared at the floor and thought very calmly, that's interesting. Because this is the part where a good husband stops being a bad liar. "Yes," I said, "I'm sure." "Okay," he said, and now he sounded distant, as if he'd stepped behind a curtain. "Okay, I'm sorry, I'll try to get on a flight." "Where are you?" "Dallas." I closed my eyes again. He had given me the lie one more time, and he had done it without even changing the shape of his voice. Something in me went still, not broken. Still, there is a difference, and in that stillness, I understood something I had not wanted to understand for months. This was no longer about being hurt. Hurt is manageable. Hurt can be survived with apologies and aspirin and time. This was about information. This was about whether the life I had built was real, or whether I had been living inside a house, made of polished wood over a sinkhole. So I did what I always do when the world starts lying to me. I started counting. The phone call had come at 7:14. He had said he was in Dallas. The trip he mentioned had supposedly started that morning, but the hotel charge I had seen 3 days earlier was not in Dallas. It was in Charlotte, one town over, under a name I had written down and not yet fully understood. The perfume on his collar the week before had not been mine. It had been Joe Malone, the expensive kind Meredith wore when she wanted to smell like someone who never raised her voice in public, and the ultrasound. God, I could still feel the humiliation of that appointment. The minute I leaned over and caught the smell on his shirt, before Dr. Ramirez had even turned the screen toward me. He had come in late, hair damp, and said traffic had been awful, but there had been no traffic on the route he claimed to have taken. I knew that because I had checked later, while he showered, while I sat on the edge of our bed pretending to scroll through my phone. The math never added up. Not the mileage on his car. Not the late-night charges. Not the way Meredith's name had started appearing in my head every I Daniel became too charming, too careful, too unavailable. I wasn't irrational. I was early. That is the insult people throw at women like me before they discover we were right. Another wave hit, stronger this time. I had to lower myself to the floor because my legs suddenly didn't trust me. My palms pressed into the tile, and the cold of it shocked me into breathing properly. Daniel was still talking. "Elena, babe, are you there?" I looked at the phone. A little ridiculous, really. The tiny black rectangle in my hand had become the doorway through which my entire life had just walked out. "I'm here," I said. "Call an ambulance." "No," the answer came out before I could soften it. He hesitated. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, I'm not doing this alone with a dispatcher while you sit in Dallas." Another silence. Then, carefully, "Elena, I'm trying." That word. Trying. Men love trying. Trying gets them praise without responsibility. Trying makes betrayal sound temporary. Trying is what people say when they want a medal for the bare minimum. I looked at the kitchen table. The fruit bowl I had washed that morning. The folded hospital bag I had packed 3 weeks earlier because I was 36 weeks pregnant with twins, and I do not trust surprise. The list I had taped to the refrigerator. Insurance card, charger, nursing bra, slippers, birth plan, everything ready. Everything except him. I said, "I know," and that was true. I did know. I knew he was trying to keep 2 lives from colliding. I knew he had probably told Meredith the same thing he told me. I knew whatever was happening in that other room, he had thought he could manage it. Men like Daniel always think they can manage a lie if they keep smiling long enough. I was done asking him for honesty. I had reached the point where honesty was no longer something I hoped to receive. It was something I intended to collect. "Do not hang up," he said. "I'm not hanging up." But I had already shifted the phone away from my face and was opening my other hand on the tile, reaching for the charger, for my keys, for the Uber app, because one thing about labor is that it does not care about pride. I called the hospital. I called the answering service. I called the Uber before my contractions got too close together to reason through. And then, with my phone wedged between my shoulder and ear, I did something I had been putting off for weeks. I opened the folder. It was sitting inside my laptop bag in the pantry, the one place Daniel never went, because he claimed the shelves were too organized, and he never knew what to touch first. That folder had started as a hunch. Then it became a habit. Then it became evidence. I had bank statements. I had calendar screenshots. I had mileage records. I had the date of every lie I could prove, and the shape of every lie I couldn't yet. I had been telling myself I was just collecting context. But that night, on the kitchen floor, with my body splitting open, and my husband pretending not to be in the same city as my sister-in-law, the truth was simpler than that. I was building a case. The first page I pulled free had charge from a hotel in Charlotte, that Daniel had called a client dinner. 2 nights later there had been a receipt from a restaurant. Meredith had tagged on Instagram with a photo of a candlelit table and a caption about unexpected company. I had not looked at the post the day she made it. I had looked at it later, after I noticed the receipt, after I noticed the timing, after I noticed the weird little overlap in his calendar. Then there was the dinner at our house. Meredith had sat across from me and passed the salt and talked about how busy she was. Busy with what? I wondered now, as another contraction climbed up my spine. Busy being the woman my husband was calling from somewhere he was not supposed to be. The Uber arrived before Daniel called back. I remember struggling to my feet and having to stop twice on the way to the front door. The apartment was silent except for my breathing and the buzz of my phone in my hand. He called 4 times in a row. I let them ring out, not because I was punishing him, because I needed evidence more than I needed comfort. That was the moment I knew I was becoming someone he would not recognize. I opened the door and the night air hit me hard enough to make me blink. The driver was an older black man in a faded baseball cap, maybe 60, maybe more. He got out when he saw me. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice changed immediately when he saw my face. "You need help?" "I need the back seat," I said. He did not ask questions after that. He just took one look at my hands, one look at the wet floor behind me, and nodded like he had seen this before and knew there was no point wasting oxygen on panic. He helped me down the steps slowly, patiently, as if the whole world had agreed to wait for me. My phone was still in my hand. Daniel had stopped calling. That was another thing I noticed. He had stopped at exactly the moment I no longer had the breath to answer. The car smelled faintly like cologne and old leather and somebody's lunch, and I remember thinking how strange it was that a stranger's car could feel safer than my own house. "Hospital?" the driver asked. "Yes." "You want quiet?" I leaned back and shut my eyes. "Please." He gave me that, no music, no small talk. Just the steady movement of the car and the city lights sliding past the window and my own breath, measured like I was counting out the evidence in my head. One contraction, then another, then a third, closer than I wanted it to be. And all the while, the questions kept circling. Who was she? How long had this been going on? Did Meredith know I knew? Or had I been the only person in the room who still thought I was married to the man who kissed my forehead before work and called me sweetheart in front of his mother? I didn't know yet, but I knew enough. I knew there was perfume on his collar that did not belong to me. I knew the numbers in his story did not line up. I knew my sister-in-law had answered a phone call while my labor had started, which meant she was either with him or close enough to hear him. And I knew, with the strange calm that comes right before a storm breaks, that I was no longer trying to save the marriage by believing him. I was trying to save myself by documenting the truth. The lights of the hospital came into view like a promise I had not earned but desperately needed. I looked down at the folder in my lap, the one I had pulled from the pantry before I left, and for the first time since the call, I felt something other than pain, not relief, not peace. Preparation. By the time we pulled up to the emergency entrance, I was not a woman being abandoned in labor. I was a woman arriving with a record of everything she had been lied to about, and by the time the first contraction hit, I already had a folder waiting in the dark. I did not need a confession. I needed evidence, and I was willing to wait 6 months to get it. That is the part people always misunderstand about betrayal. They imagine the big moment first, the slammed door, the shaking hands, the tears, the dramatic reveal. But that is not where it starts. It starts much earlier. In the quiet place where a woman notices one detail that doesn't fit, and then another, until the whole pattern begins to tilt under its own weight. For me, it started in an exam room with a paper sheet under my legs and my husband arriving 40 minutes late with damp hair and a shirt that smelled like someone else's perfume. Not my perfume, not any perfume I had ever worn either. Jo Malone. Crisp, expensive, and unmistakable in the way a certain kind of woman likes to leave a signature without signing her name. I knew that scent. I had smelled it on my sister-in-law's wrists at Christmas dinner, on the collar of her coat at Easter, on the envelope she handed me when she wanted to seem warm. It was a perfume that announced itself politely and stayed long after the person had left. Daniel stood beside the ultrasound screen, smiling like a good husband in a magazine ad, one hand resting on the edge of my chair, the other still holding his car keys. "Sorry I'm late," he said. Client ran long. The doctor was already moving the wand across my belly, her eyes on the screen. I was too tired to argue, too tired to ask why the client meeting had left him with perfume on his shirt, and a wet patch through his hair, and a pulse that seems little too fast for someone who had supposedly spent the morning in boardrooms. That day, Dr. Ramirez smiled and said the word twins. Daniel's face lit up with the right kind of surprise, the kind that would make anyone looking at us think he was thrilled. He touched my shoulder and said, "That's incredible," in a voice so smooth it should have won awards. I smiled too. I was not smiling because I believed him. I was smiling because I had just been handed a fact, and facts are calming in ways that people are not. After the appointment, I sat in the passenger seat while Daniel drove us home and told me how lucky we were. Lucky. He used that word too often when he was trying to make a moment sound innocent. Lucky to have each other. Lucky to be building a family. Lucky that his schedule was flexible enough to be present. Present. That was another word that started sounding wrong, because he was never actually where he said he was. At first I checked the easy things, the way any wife would. The calendar, the email timestamps, the receipts he tossed into the center console. Then I started checking the things Daniel assumed no one would check because Daniel believed other people were too sentimental to be suspicious. He was wrong. Numbers are not sentimental. Numbers are honest even when they're ugly. I pulled the bank statements one night after he was asleep on the couch, with the TV still on. I told myself I was just organizing. That was the lie I told myself so I could get through the first 20 minutes without feeling foolish. I spread the papers across the kitchen table, put on my reading glasses, and began doing what I have done my whole adult life, looking for a story hidden inside a ledger. At first there was nothing dramatic. Small hotel charges, gas station stops that didn't match his route, a restaurant bill on a Tuesday he had claimed to be in Atlanta, a rideshare receipt late enough to be suspicious and early enough to be intentional. Then I saw the pattern. The charges were clustered around the same building in South End, a glass and bricks place with a polished lobby and private parking. 1 month of charges, then 2, then 8, then 11. 11 months of rent paid with a corporate card Daniel did not own. 11 months of a second life hidden inside the expense account of the family company. I wrote the address down. Then I wrote it down again on a different page, because when I find something that matters, I trust redundancy more than emotion. The thing about being an accountant is that people imagine you love numbers because numbers are clean. That's not true. I love numbers because they do not flinch. A spreadsheet does not try to charm you. A bank statement does not ask you to be understanding. A mileage log does not care if you're lonely. It simply tells the truth or it doesn't, and Daniel's truth was starting to smell like a lie. I followed the trail one receipt at a time. Dinner charged in Charlotte when he said he was on a delayed flight. A boutique hotel in Charleston on a weekend he had called a golf trip. A jeweler's receipt for a diamond bracelet I had never seen because, as I later realized, it had not been purchased for the world to see. It had been purchased for private rooms, private wrists, private apologies. And every time I uncovered something new, I did not confront him. I recorded it. That is the difference between panic and preparation. Panic asks questions hoping to hear reassurance. Preparation asks questions because it already knows the answer and wants the paper trail to prove it. I started saving screenshots, calendar invites, fuel receipts, notes from the odometer. The mileage on his car did not match the places he said he had been. A 10-minute drive became 40 minutes. A business dinner turned into an overnight stay. A meeting in Dallas somehow included charges from a restaurant 2 blocks from my sister-in-law's apartment. My sister-in-law, Meredith. Even her name felt different once I gave myself permission to hold it next to the evidence. Because once you know, you cannot unknow. What I had suspected before began to sharpen into something colder. I remembered the way Meredith had hugged Daniel too long at Thanksgiving. The way she answered his jokes before anyone else could. The way she always seemed to know his mood, his schedule, his excuses. I remembered the Sunday dinners where Diane, my mother-in-law, smiled at the two of them, in that absent, grateful way some mothers smile when they believe their children are still harmless. She never saw what was in front of her, or maybe she did and refused to translate it. There are women who sense the rot and name it, and there are women who would rather live in a beautiful house full of it than open the windows. Diane had chosen the second kind of peace. I had not, so I kept going. When the bank records weren't enough, I went to the corporate card statements. That was where the picture stopped being vague and started becoming offensive. Rental payments, meal charges, hotel stays. One purchase from an upscale lingerie store that made my throat tighten so fast I had to put the page down and stand by the sink until my breathing settled. The timing was always the same. The lies came in clusters. He would disappear for 2 or 3 days, then return with some polished explanation about work and client pressure, and how he hated leaving me alone like that. He said it with such practiced concern that for a while I almost hated him for being so good at sounding sorry. Almost, but not enough to make me stupid. I began tracking the rhythm of his absences the way some women track weather, not because they want the storm, because they want to know when to cover the windows. Every time I thought I might be imagining it, another detail would land in my lap. A perfume sample in the pocket of his coat, a parking charge at the Ellsworth Building garage, a restaurant receipt with Meredith's favorite wine, a text notification that flashed across his phone before he could turn it over. Just 1 letter. Still enough. I was standing in our bedroom the first time I saw it, holding his shirt as if I were going to fold it. The screen lit up on the nightstand, and for 1 stupid second my whole body went cold and hot at once. The message disappeared before I could read the whole thing, but I did not need the whole thing. I had the first letter, the timing, the way Daniel's face changed when he realized I had seen the glow. People think betrayal is one big event. It is not. It is 100 tiny ones arranged so carefully that by the time you can name the crime has already been in the room for months. After that, I stopped looking at Daniel the way a wife looks at a husband. I started looking at him the way an auditor looks at a balance sheet after a missing column has been found. What is here? What is missing? What was moved? What was hidden? What was never meant to be seen? That was how I lived for the next 6 months. I still made dinner. I still answered his mother's calls. I still went to work and signed off on quarterly reports and smiled at people in elevators and listened to women tell me how radiant I looked and how lucky I was to be carrying twins. Lucky again. People say that when they want to turn a woman's exhaustion into a blessing, I let them. Because while they were admiring my bump, I was building a file. By the time September came, I had enough to hire someone. His name was Vivian Okafor, and he was one of those men who looks like he's been tired since 1998, and still manages to appear sharp enough to notice everything. I found him through a recommendation from a colleague who said, very casually, that Vivian could uncover a lie from the sound of a door closing. I met him once in a coffee shop near my office. He never raised his voice. He never wasted a word. He looked through the evidence I had laid out in a neat stack and asked me one question. How long have you known? Not suspected. Known. I told him the truth. Since April, he nodded like that was all the confirmation he needed. And you didn't confront him. I wanted the whole shape of it first. Vivian folded his hands on the table. That's usually what smart people say right before they do something very dangerous. I looked at him and smiled without warmth. I'm an accountant. Dangerous is simply another form of organized. He actually laughed at that just once. Then he helped me put the rest of the pieces together. Apartment 4B. The parking records, the corporate card trail, the hotel stays. The dates that lined up too neatly to be accidental. The quiet little life Daniel had built in the space between my trust and his appetite. Vivian gave me more than proof. He gave me patience. He told me not to act until I had the kind of evidence that could survive being read by someone who loved Daniel. That was the bar. Not whether it was true, whether it could survive the family excuses. It was a colder standard than I was used to, but then again, cold things preserve. So I waited. That was the hardest part. Waiting when you know. Waiting while your body gets heavier and your patience thinner, and everybody around you keeps calling you sweet names like lovely and glowing and strong. Waiting while you learn that the mind can hold two versions of reality at once if it has to. One where your husband is still your husband, and one where he has already become a stranger with your last name. The baby shower made the waiting worth it. Not because I wanted to celebrate. I did not. I wanted to watch. There is a difference. Meredith insisted on hosting, which should have told me everything I needed to know. She said she wanted to take care of me, and she said it in the same smooth voice she used when she was performing generosity for an audience. The house in Myers Park was perfect in the way people become perfect when they want to impress the women whose opinions matter. Fresh flowers, white linens, gold accents, candles that cost too much and smelled like money pretending to be innocence. I arrived in a navy dress with my grandmother's pearl earrings and a face calm enough to pass for grateful. I was not there to enjoy myself. I was there to watch the machinery work. Meredith greeted me at the door like she was receiving royalty. She wore pale pink, of course. Soft, deliberate, carefully chosen to make her look gentle. She had even worn the perfume, Jo Malone, the exact scent I had found on Daniel's collar. There are some details a guilty person believes no one will notice because they seem too small to matter, but small details are where women like me live. Ellie, Meredith said, opening her arms. You look beautiful. I let her hug me. Her smile was polished. Her hands were warm. Her eyes, though, were doing that quick, tiny thing eyes do when they are checking whether the room still belongs to them. I saw it. I saw all of it. Diane, my mother-in-law, was already seated in the living room in a cream cardigan and pearls. She looked serene in the way some older women look serene when they have spent decades confusing denial with grace. She clasped my hand and told me how excited she was for the girls. She said twins were such a blessing, which is what people say when they want to stay on the safe side of God while ignoring the human mess in front of them. Daniel arrived a few minutes later, carrying a wrapped box and the expression of a man who had practiced tenderness on the way over. He kissed my cheek too long. He asked twice if I was comfortable. He set one hand over my stomach and said, I can't wait to meet them, as if he had not spent months being somewhere else. I watched his mother melt. That was the most revealing part. Diane adored him with an almost embarrassing devotion, the kind that makes grown men feel entitled to be forgiven in advance. She looked at him as if he were still the boy she once tucked into bed, not the man who had turned her family into a lie. And Meredith, standing near the drinks table, kept orbiting him like she was simply being thoughtful. If you didn't know better, you might have called it affection. If you did know better, you understood it for what it was. Habit, cover, permission. She touched his arm a little too often. He leaned toward her a little too naturally. Their timing had the ease of people who had done this before. I smiled through all of it. I listened. I noted who stood where, who looked away, who laughed too fast, who pretended not to notice what was in plain sight. The women around us were busy cooing over blankets and tiny socks and pastel ribbons. They thought this was a celebration. They had no idea they were standing on a floorboard that already knew how to creak. Meredith was magnificent that afternoon. I'll give her that. She moved through the room with the grace of someone who had spent years learning how to look indispensable. She refilled glasses before they emptied. She remembered names. She bent down to ask me if I was doing okay every time a new guest arrived, and each time her face showed just enough concern to look maternal. Performance is a skill, so is restraint. I had both. When the gifts were done, Meredith stood in front of everyone holding 2 tiny blankets she had made herself, one with Harper's name, one with Hazel's. The room quieted in that soft, reverent way rooms do when a woman is about to cry in public. Meredith pressed one hand over her heart and started speaking. She said she had cried when Daniel told her about the twins. She said she knew those little girls would be loved. She said Elena was the most prepared person she had ever met, which was true enough to sound generous and false enough to sting. Then she praised family. That was where I really started paying attention. She said family was about loyalty, about showing up, about protecting one another. She said children could feel when adults were being authentic and when they were only playing a role. Every sentence she spoke carried 2 meanings. One for the room, one for me. She was excellent at that. I waited until she finished, until the room had done the polite thing and applauded, until Diane had dabbed her eyes and Daniel had smiled that careful, public smile he used when he wanted to look like a man worthy of admiration. Then I stood. I did it slowly because pregnancy with twins does not reward speed. I placed one hand on the chair beside me and let the room watch me take my time. I wanted them to, because a speech is not just words, it is a door opening and closing at once. I lifted my glass of sparkling water. Meredith, I said, my voice even, thank you for everything you've done today. She smiled, not widely, just enough. I looked around the room, letting my eyes settle on each face the way a judge settles on a jury. I've spent 9 years in this family, I continued, and one thing I've learned is that people often tell you who they are by what they are willing to protect. The room got quieter. Daniel shifted his weight near the wall. Diane was still smiling, but hers had become the kind of smile mothers wear when they think they are about to hear something sweet. I went on. Some people protect the truth. Some people protect appearances. Some people protect each other, even when they shouldn't. Meredith's fingers tightened around the blanket in her hands. I could see it, just barely, but I saw it. Harper and Hazel, I said, resting my free hand on my belly, are going to grow up learning the difference. They are going to learn which kind of love is loud and which kind is real. A few women nodded politely. A few didn't know whether to smile. I turned toward Meredith just enough to make the meaning clear. These blankets are beautiful. The stitching is careful. You can tell someone took their time. She looked at me, still smiling, but now the smile had to work harder. And I will always remember, I said, who put in the effort to make this afternoon look perfect. There it was, the first invisible crack, not a gasp, not a shout. Nothing dramatic enough for the room to name it, just a tiny change in the air. Meredith's eyes flicked not fully to Daniel, just in his direction, 1/2 second. That was all it took. Daniel looked down at his drink. Diane, who had not yet understood, lifted her glass and said softly, "To Elena." I raised mine in answer. "To Meredith," I said, with a smile that did not reach my eyes, who always knows how to make everything look exactly the way it should. Half the room drank, half hesitated, and in that hesitation I saw it land. Not in everybody, only in the guilty. The guilty always feel the room shift before anyone else does. It's a private skill they develop. A kind of weather sense. Meredith's smile stayed in place, but the skin around it tightened. Daniel's jaw went still. Diane looked between the two of them and then back at me, confused by something she could not yet name. That was enough. I sat down again slowly, folding my hands over my lap as if I had simply made a pleasant toast at a baby shower and not turned the entire room into a chessboard. The party kept moving. People clapped too late. Someone laughed a little too brightly. A server came by with champagne and macarons. Music started up again, thin and cheerful, trying to restore the illusion of ease. But the room had changed. I could feel it. Meredith moved through the rest of the afternoon with her usual grace, but it was thinner now. Less effortless. She kept smiling, but she did not look at me again the way she had at the beginning. Daniel stopped touching her arm. Diane kept glancing between us like a woman sensing a draft in a room she thought was sealed. That was the crack, small enough to deny, sharp enough to matter, and by the end of the baby shower I had something better than suspicion. I had a map. At 2:47 a.m., a gray-suited man walked into my hospital room and placed my husband's life in a folder beside my bed. I had been waiting for that knock all night. Not because I wanted to see what was inside, because I needed the evidence to stop being theoretical. The room was dim except for the spill of yellow light from the hallway and the soft blue glow from the monitor by my shoulder. Harper was finally asleep against my chest, warm and heavy and furious even in dreams, while Hazel lay in the bassinet with one eye half open, like she had already decided sleep was a negotiable arrangement. The room smelled like antiseptic, plastic, and the clean milk scent of new skin. For a moment, nobody spoke. Mr. Ellis stood by the door with the careful posture of a man who understood that some truths enter a room like a knife and some arrive like paperwork. He was mid-40s, tired around the eyes, his tie loosened just enough, to show he had come straight from a long night somewhere else. He held the folder against his chest for 1 second before crossing to me and placing it on the blanket beside my hip as if he were setting down something sacred or contaminated. Maybe both. Alina, he said quietly. You said before sunrise. I did. He nodded once. Then this is before sunrise. I looked at the folder. Thick. Manila. Softened at the edges by weeks of handling and rehandling. A small stack of my husband's lies, neatly clipped and labeled. Thank you, I said. He did not smile. I flagged the pages you'll want first. Then you already know the shape of it. I do. That was one of the reasons I hired him. Not because he was dramatic. Because he knew when not to perform. He glanced at the twins, then away. He knew enough not to make a scene out of wonder. He only dipped his head, as if acknowledging two very small witnesses, and stepped back toward the door. If you need anything else, he said, use the number on the back of the card. I know. He paused, then added, Mrs. Carter, I'm sorry. I almost laughed at that. Not because it was funny. Because it was useless and kind, and sometimes those are the same thing. Don't be sorry for the truth, I said. Be sorry for the people who built their lives around not having to hear it. He held my eyes for a beat, then left. The door clicked shut. And just like that, the room belonged to me again. Harper stirred against my chest, her mouth rooting in her sleep, and I adjusted the blanket over her tiny back. The monitor beeped softly. Hazel made a low sound from the bassinet, not quite a cry. More like a complaint from someone who had inherited her father's timing but none of his character. I looked at them both, and for the first time in 14 hours, the pain in my body felt smaller than the pain in my chest. Because I knew what was in the folder. I had known for months. But knowing and seeing are not the same thing. Knowing is a private sickness. Seeing is when it becomes a sentence. The night had begun long before the folder, long before the hospital, long before the babies. It had begun on my kitchen floor, with a burst of warmth between my legs, a contraction that made my knees buckle, and Daniel's voice coming through the phone, with the smooth confidence of a man who believed timing was something he could always control. I had heard him say Dallas. I had heard a woman laugh in the background, not a big laugh, not the kind that demands attention. A small, familiar sound, the sort of laugh a woman gives when she knows she is already inside the story. I remember standing there with one hand braced on the counter, and the other pressed hard against my belly, my breath coming in short, measured pulls. Water on the tile, pain climbing my spine, the world narrowing to the shape of one terrible certainty. He was not where he said he was, again. I did not beg. That was the beginning of the end too, not the lie itself. The moment I stopped asking it to confess, I told him to drive safe, in the same calm voice I used in meetings when someone said something stupid, and I needed the room to know I had heard it. Then I hung up, called an Uber, and called Mr. Ellis. By the time Curtis pulled up outside my house in his old Toyota Camry, I was already in labor. He was a black man, probably in his 60s, wearing a Carolina Panthers cap, and the kind of expression men get when they've learned not to pry, because life has already taught them too much. He opened the back door for me without asking questions. I eased myself in, one careful breath at a time, trying not to let the pain show. He looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Ma'am," he said gently, "you breathing?" "I am." "You want quiet?" I nodded. "Quiet, please." "Yes, ma'am." He drove through Charlotte in complete silence. 9 minutes of red lights and shallow breaths, and the old dread that comes when you know you are about to bring life into a world that has already disappointed you. At the hospital entrance, he got out and came around to help me because I'd gone too still in the seat. He saw my face and knew enough to lower his voice even further. "I'm not taking the fare," he said. "You don't have to do that." "I want to." Then he smiled at me in the rearview mirror with the sadness of a man who had seen this kind of night before. "My wife had twins in '93. You're going to be all right. God sees you." That was the first moment I nearly broke. Not because of Daniel, not because of the pain. Because a stranger in a baseball cap had shown me more care in 10 seconds than my husband had shown me in weeks. I swallowed the tears back down, thanked him, and walked into triage with my bag in one hand and my dignity in the other. Patricia found me not long after that. Nurse Patricia was the kind of woman who did not ask if you were strong. She assumed you had already used your strength up and simply provided more where it was needed. She had quick eyes, a practical voice, and hands that moved with the confidence of someone who had held too many women together to be sentimental about it. She checked me, glanced at the monitor, and gave me the look every laboring woman deserves from somebody in scrubs. "You're doing fine," she said. I told her I was 38, first pregnancy, twins, and very much not fine. She tilted her head. "Then you're doing fine for a woman who's not fine. There are some forms of compassion that only show up when a woman recognizes another woman's silence. Patricia had that gift. She saw the ringless kind of loneliness before I ever said the word husband. She tucked a blanket around my legs and asked, "Where's your person?" "My husband is in Dallas." She did not ask why Dallas. She did not ask for proof. She only looked at me for half a second longer than a stranger should. Then she pulled a chair beside my bed and sat down like she intended to. "I ain't going anywhere, honey," she said. I turned my face toward the wall and let one tear fall. Just one. Enough to admit I was human. Not enough to give the night the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. Then the contractions got worse. The room became breath, pressure, white light, and Patricia's voice reminding me to exhale while I wanted to scream at the ceiling, at the phone, at Dallas, at every man who had ever decided a woman could wait. Harper arrived first at 1:19. She came into the world with a cry so furious the nurse at the station laughed through the open door. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, a dark head of hair plastered to her forehead, a face already offended by every inconvenience life had introduced so far. Patricia laid her on my chest, warm and wet and outraged, and I looked down at her and felt something in me split cleanly in two. Not break, split. Because one half of me was still the wife waiting for a call that would never be honest. The other half was already her mother. "I've got you," I whispered. "I've got you." Harper's mouth opened and closed like she was searching for a complaint I had not yet heard. Hazel came 9 minutes later, smaller, quieter, 6 pounds 9 ounces, with that same grave little expression some babies have when they seem to understand more than they should. She did not cry right away. She opened one gray eye and stared straight at me, and for a strange second, I felt as if she had been watching from somewhere behind the veil of my own life for months, taking inventory. "Hello, sweetheart," I said softly. "I've been waiting for you, too." Patricia laughed through tears she pretended not to have. "Well, look at that," she murmured. "You got one firecracker and one thinker." "I think the thinker might be the dangerous one," I said. "Oh, she is," Patricia replied. "Those are the ones to watch." They moved me to recovery sometime after 2. Private room, 2 bassinets. One window cracked open because I asked for air. The heat in maternity wards is always too much, and never enough at the same time. Patricia left me with a squeeze of the shoulder, a promise to check on us. and the kind of look that says I know what you're not saying, and I'm not making you say it. After she left, the room went very still. Harper slept against my collarbone. Hazel watched from her bassinet with one eye open, as if she were making sure I hadn't disappeared. I looked around at the room, at the hospital blanket, at my daughters, at my hands, and then I opened the folder. The first photograph was of the South End building, apartment 4B. I knew the address before I ever saw the picture. That was the cruel part. My body had known before my mind was willing to name it. I had driven past that building in April and sat in my car for 11 minutes, with both hands locked around the wheel, staring at the glass and brick like I could intimidate the truth into staying hidden. In the photo, Daniel was walking through the front entrance with a bottle of Cabernet in one hand, navy blazer, relaxed shoulders, timestamp, 11:04 p.m., the night of my baby shower. I turned the page, another angle, same building, same garage, a white Lexus pulling into 4B2. I knew that license plate. Meredith stepped out of the car, wearing the pale pink dress she had worn all afternoon at the shower. She still had the gift bag in her hand. She paused in the garage, looked at her phone, smiled one small private smile, and walked toward the elevator. I held that image in my hands for a long time. Not because it surprised me, because it made the betrayal physical. Before the folder, the affair had lived in the gray zone that lies between suspicion and proof. It was a smell on a collar, a delay that didn't make sense, a tone in his voice that no longer matched the story. It was a woman's perfume, Jo Malone, on a shirt that had no business carrying it. It was a text notification flashing M before he could flip his phone over. It was the feeling of counting money in a drawer and discovering a bill missing by the shape of the space around it. But photographs have a different power. They don't suggest, they testify. I moved to the next page, the corporate card statements. There it was, line by line, the ugly arithmetic of a double life. Rent to Ellsworth 4B, month after month after month. 11 months of payments made with a company card Daniel did not own. The family card. The Carter and Vance card. The one his father signed for, because Richard Carter still believed blood meant something if the last name was heavy enough. Then the hotels. Charleston, the Ritz-Carlton. A boutique place in Asheville that Daniel had told me was a conference retreat. The Greenbrier, the one I had asked him to take me to every anniversary since year 2, and every year he had said the same thing in the same tone. Too expensive. Too much work. Maybe next year, babe. Maybe next year. Apparently next year had been reserved for somebody else. My stomach tightened. I turned another page and found a receipt from Windsor Jewelers, a diamond tennis bracelet. I did not need to see the name to know who it was for. I had never seen that bracelet on any wrist at Sunday dinner, which meant it lived somewhere else, somewhere private, somewhere I had not been invited to stand. There was also a Jo Malone gift set, $76, purchased 2 days before my ultrasound appointment. The same appointment where Daniel had shown up 40 minutes late with wet hair, a shirt that smelled like another woman, and a polished smile that said sorries in a language designed to make a wife doubt her own nose. I pressed my hand to my mouth, not because I was going to scream, because I almost laughed, not a happy laugh. The kind that comes when the mind finally catches up to the insult. The kind that says you have got to be kidding me. He had not been smart. He had been loved. That was the truth buried under all the other truths. My husband had spent his whole adult life in a family that treated him like the weather. Expected, excused, covered over. His mother adored him. His sister polished him. His father signed the checks and looked the other way long enough for the rot to feel like privilege. Daniel had mistaken protection for permission. He had mistaken family loyalty for immunity. And in the middle of it all, he had used the company card like a man who believed no one would ever count. That part, more than anything, told me who he really was. Not a mastermind, a dependent. A man who had never once had to pay for the full cost of his own choices. I closed the folder for a second, set it on my lap, and looked down at Harper asleep against my chest. The babies were here. My body had done what it was supposed to do. My marriage had not. There was something almost holy in how clean the division felt. One life entering, one life ending, both at the same hour. I reopened the folder and found the page on the apartment itself. 4B by South End. A lease paid month to month through Carter and Vance Holdings. That was the part that hardened everything inside me. Not the sex, not the romance, not even Meredith. The money, because once he crossed the line from lies into theft, the whole thing changed shape. It was no longer only betrayal. It was fraud. It was accounting. It was a trail that could survive a funeral. And if there is one thing I know, it is that numbers do not flinch. Numbers do not love you. Numbers do not forgive you. Numbers do not protect you when the walls start closing in. I heard the soft movement of a chair behind me and looked up to find Patricia returning with fresh ice chips and a look that said she had already decided I was not allowed to fall apart on her shift. "How are the girls?" she asked. "Beautiful." "That's not what I asked." "No," I said, taking the cup from her. "It isn't." She studied my face, then glanced at the folder on my lap. "You want me to get somebody?" "No, I've got it." "You sure?" I looked down at the statements, at the photographs, at the building where my husband had been sleeping in somebody else's life while I was carrying his children. "Yes," I said. "I'm sure." Patricia nodded once, as if that answer mattered to her more than the details. "Then breathe first," she said. "Decisions land better after breath." That was the kind of wisdom women like Patricia hand out for free, and men like Daniel spend years undervaluing. I took one breath, then another. Then I picked up the hospital phone. The number I dialed was the one I had memorized 6 months earlier. Vivian Okafor answered on the second ring. "Vivian," I said. "I was expecting you." The folder arrived, a slight pause. Then, "So it's time." "It is." I looked at Harper's tiny hand curled against my hospital gown, and Hazel watching me from the bassinet, like she already understood that the world had just shifted under her feet. "Pull the trigger on everything we drafted," I said. "Freeze the joint accounts. Revoke the corporate card. File the emergency custody motion first thing in the morning." "Understood." "And Vivian?" "Yes?" "I want Richard Carter informed personally, not by email, not by assistant, personally." Another pause, this one longer. "Do you want me to tell him what happened?" I glanced at the folder. "Yes," I said. "Tell him exactly what happened." "He let that sit for half a beat. That may break him. I know." "Mrs. Carter." I held the phone tighter. "Tell him I'm sorry. And tell him I know what this is going to cost him as a father." Vivian exhaled softly through the line. "You know he'll thank you. That's the part that breaks my heart." He was quiet again. "I'm leaving now. When you call Richard," I said, "make sure he hears it from someone he can't dismiss." "You mean from a woman?" "Yes," I said, "from a woman who knows the difference between pity and accountability." That earned me the faintest sound of approval on the other end. "I'm in the car already," he said. "Give me 20 minutes. I hung up. The room felt different after that, not calmer, sharper, as if a line had been crossed and the air itself knew it. I leaned back against the pillow, closed my eyes for a second, and let the exhaustion wash through me. By sunrise, Daniel's name would come off every account we owned. By breakfast, he would know the card was dead. By the time Richard Carter finished his first cup of coffee, his son's second life would already be on his kitchen table in black and white. But not yet. For the moment, there was only this room, these 2 daughters, and the folder that had turned my marriage into evidence. Patricia came back with a new blanket and a look toward the hallway. "Want me to keep an eye out for anyone?" "I'm expecting one more visitor," I said. She gave me the same careful nod she had given me all night, the nod that says, "I hear you. I'm not asking why, and I won't leave you alone with it." Harper made a small hungry sound. Hazel blinked once, slow and solemn. I held my children close and watched the dark window for the first gray hint of morning. Somewhere across Charlotte, my husband was still sleeping inside the lie. Somewhere else, Richard Carter was about to be told the truth by a woman he trusted more than his own son. And when the first phone call rang, it would not be mine that shook. It would be his. By sunrise, my husband would be cut off from every account, every favor, and every lie that had protected him for years. That was the first thing I understood after the folder closed. The second was that none of it would happen loudly. There would be no dramatic shouting in the hallway. No furniture thrown across a room. No ugly scene for strangers to remember. Charlotte has a way of punishing people politely. The money goes first. Then the phone calls stop. Then the people who once laughed at your bad behavior begin speaking about you in a softer voice, the way they do around a grave. I sat in the hospital bed with Harper asleep against my chest, and Hazel watching me from the bassinet, and I waited for the machine inside my life to start switching off the pieces one by one. It began with Richard Carter. He arrived just after 6 in the morning, carrying white tulips in one hand, and the kind of expression men his age only wear when they have already decided the truth matters more than pride. The door opened slowly, almost respectfully, and he stepped inside like he was entering a chapel. Richard was a Southern man of the old school. Not flashy, not soft, polished shoes, pressed slacks, sweater over a collared shirt because that was how he had been taught to look when dignity was required. He had spent his whole life being the man other men called before they made mistakes they could not afford to explain. He stopped when he saw me. Then he looked at the bassinets, then the folder beside my bed. For a few seconds, nobody said anything. He just stood there, holding those flowers with a grip that was a little too tight, as if he had brought them for a wedding and walked into a funeral instead. "I was told this was urgent," he said at last. It was. His jaw tightened once, very small. Then he nodded. He set the tulips on the table with almost ceremonial care, and lowered himself into the chair beside the bed. He did not sit back. He sat forward, elbows on his knees, the way men do when they already know the conversation is going to cost them something. "I read the report," he said, "all of it. I know. I also know," he said carefully, "that I raised a son who believed his name could insulate him from consequences." I looked at him. That was not a confession men like Richard usually make out loud. "I'm sorry," he added, and it landed not as sympathy but as shame. "Don't apologize to me for what your son chose." His eyes moved once toward Harper, then Hazel. "No," he said. "I'm apologizing for what my house taught him was normal." That was the thing about Richard Carter. He was not sentimental, but he was honest in the way some old men are only honest when the bill has finally come due. He did not try to defend Daniel. He did not ask me to think about the family. He did not say blood is blood or marriage is complicated or boys make mistakes. He asked only one question. "How far does this go?" I told him. The apartment, the company card, the rent, the bracelet, the hotel stays, the lies around the ultrasound appointment. The way Daniel had been using a family system built on trust like it was a private checking account. Richard listened without interrupting. When I finished, he took off his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. Then he said, "I can stop the bleeding. That's not the same thing as fixing it." "No," he replied. "It is not." He stood up, crossed to the window, and looked out at the first gray's light over Charlotte like a man trying to remember what kind of father he had promised himself he would be. When he turned back, the softness was gone. "At 8 o'clock, he said, "I am calling an emergency board meeting. Daniel will be removed from every active role in the company. His corporate access will be shut off. His cards are already being canceled. By the end of the day, he will not have authority over a single account." I studied his face. Not rage, not revenge. Procedure. That was the real power in the room, not emotion, administration. "I also called the attorney," he continued. "The trust clause I wrote 30 years ago is being activated. If I had hoped never to use it, I hoped in vain." His mouth flattened once. "I will not let him spend another dollar he has not earned." Harper shifted against my collarbone, and I kissed the crown of her head without looking away from Richard. "And what will you tell him?" I asked. "The truth. Will he hear it?" Richard gave a tired little exhale through his nose. Not the first time. That sounded almost like love and almost like mercy and almost like a sentence. He moved closer to the bed then, lowering his voice. "Alina, if I do this, there is no way back into the old arrangement." "There shouldn't be." He nodded once. "Your daughters will never need to wonder whether the adults around them were willing to protect them." That was the first crack in his voice. Not enough for tears, just enough to prove he was human under all that old Southern steel. "I should have done this years ago," he said. No, I told him. You should have done something years ago. This is just the first honest thing. He looked at me for a long beat, and I knew he understood that I was not comforting him. I was telling the truth in the only way I had left. Then he glanced at the folder on my lap. One more thing, he said. What? When Daniel finds out, he will come looking for someone to blame. I know. Richard's face hardened. Then let him blame me. Let him blame the board. Let him blame the economy, the banks, the weather. He will be spared nothing else. That almost made me smile. Almost. Because what Richard was really saying was this: I will become the wall between your husband and the full force of what he did. And he meant it. He left a few minutes later, after promising to call me before noon with the board's decision. When the door shut behind him, the room felt colder. Not emptier, sharper. I turned my head toward the window and watched the sky lighten by degrees while Harper slept and Hazel watched and the hospital made its quiet little sounds around us. Then the phone started. Not mine, his. I did not hear the call itself, but I knew exactly when it happened because the board always moves before the family gossip does. The first thing Daniel lost was not a relationship. It was permission. He was at Starbucks on Tryon Street when it happened. I know because my investigator called me later and told me the whole humiliating sequence in the dry tone of a man reading from a report, which somehow made it worse. Daniel had shown up there with a paper cup in one hand and a bouquet of grocery store roses in the other, probably thinking he still had enough charm left to bluff his way through the morning. He ordered a vanilla latte like nothing in the world had changed. Then he swiped the company card. Declined. He tried it again. Declined. The barista, a young woman with purple hair and the expression of someone trained not to panic when a grown man starts sweating in public, asked if he had another card. He did. He reached for his personal visa. Declined. Then another. Declined. I imagined him standing there, holding those flowers, watching the line behind him begin to shift with that polite, horrified impatience people reserve for someone else's collapse. Daniel had always depended on the environment protecting him, on the room smoothing its own edges around his embarrassment, on being the Carter son, the expected one, the one who would eventually be taken care of no matter how badly he behaved. But public humiliation is different when there is no backup, when there is no father to rescue you, when there is no wife to absorb it, when the system itself has decided you are the leak. The barista told him the accounts were closed. Closed. Not temporarily declined. Not flagged. Closed. He left the latte at the counter and walked out with no coffee, no money, and roses that now looked less romantic than pathetic. Then came the second wound. The Range Rover was gone, recovered by the asset company, towed before dawn. Zip-tied notice left on the chain-link fence where he had parked it the night before. He called his father from the parking lot. Richard answered on the second ring. I was not in the room for that conversation, but I didn't need to be. Men like Richard do not raise their voices when they are done with you. They lower them. Daniel said there was been a mistake. Richard said there had not. Daniel started explaining. Richard stopped him. Daniel said it was complicated. Richard said, "No, Daniel. What you did was simple." Then he told him not to come to the office, not to come to his house, not to call again, until he could speak like a man who understood the difference between desire and theft, and then he hung up. That was the sound of the family door closing. Not with a bang, with a lock turning. By the time Daniel reached the hospital, he had already begun to understand that the old map no longer worked. I knew he was coming because Patricia checked the hallway twice and then came back with that look nurses get when a man enters the building, carrying both guilt and denial in the same jacket pocket. "Your husband's here," she said. I looked down at Harper asleep on my chest. "How long?" 5 minutes. "Let him wait." She gave me a small nod. No judgment, just recognition. That mattered more than I can explain. Because waiting for once was not something being done to me. It was something I was using. While Daniel stood in the hall trying to piece himself together, the next collapse was already happening somewhere else in town. Meredith. Diane called her at home. I know that too because Diane told me later, and because women like Diane do not call in anger first. They call after they have walked through the hurt, sat with it, prayed over it, and decided that love does not mean pretending a wound is not there. Meredith was still in the apartment at the Ellsworth when the phone rang. She had not slept. She had spent the morning moving in small circles through the kitchen in her robe, probably trying to convince herself that if she stayed still enough, the consequences might forget her address. But consequences, once they start, are very punctual. Diane's voice, I was told, was calm at first. She asked Meredith to sit down. She asked if she was alone. She asked if she remembered the shower, and then she said the words that changed everything. I know, that was all it took. Meredith tried to deny it, I'm sure. People like her always do at first. Not because they believe the lie, but because they can't survive the shape of the truth all at once. Diane did not argue. She listed the dates, the apartment, the company card. The dress Meredith wore the afternoon, she smiled at me over a table full of gifts. The phone records, the late nights. The story Daniel had told everybody while I was downstairs in labor, and he was upstairs in somebody else's bed. By the time Diane finished, Meredith was crying. Not the pretty kind of crying people do when they want forgiveness to arrive early. The ugly kind, the kind that strips the face down to what it is underneath. And then Diane did what mothers are not supposed to have to do. She broke the pattern. She told her daughter she loved her, and then she told her she was no longer available to rescue her from the consequences of what she had chosen. No calls, no dinners, no holidays, no easy return to the same old role where Meredith could be adored without ever being held accountable. I learned later that Diane sat at her kitchen table with the window open the whole time, one hand on the phone, the other gripping the edge of the chair, because she knew if she let herself soften too much she would go right back to making excuses for the child she had favored. That was the terrible mercy of it. Diane hurt herself on purpose to stop the damage from passing down another generation. When the call ended, Meredith was alone in the apartment she had helped decorate with all those clean neutral colors and expensive little lies, and for the first time in her life, there was nobody left in the room who wanted to believe her version of events more than the facts. Back in the hospital, Patricia came in carrying fresh ice water and that practical expression she wore when she could sense the air changing. "Your husband is still out there," she said. "Good. You want me to keep him there?" I looked at Harper, then Hazel, then the folder on the tray table. "Give me 5 more minutes," she did. 5 minutes later, Richard called. The board had met. The decision was unanimous. Daniel was out. Not suspended, not reviewed, not pending. Out. His email access was gone. His company badge was dead. His office was being cleared by security. His salary would stop at close of business. The trust paperwork was already moving. The public statement had been drafted in the language of clinical boredom corporations use when they are trying to bury a family scandal without saying the word scandal. Richard's voice was tight when he said it, but steady. He had done it. He had really done it. Then he added, "He's in your hallway. I know. He wants to come in." "I'm not surprised." There was a pause. "Alina," Richard said quietly. "He looks terrible." I closed my eyes for 1 second. "That's not my problem." "No," he said. "It isn't." Then, softer, "Would you like me to take him home?" I looked at Hazel, who had that grave little stare already, like she was evaluating every adult in the building. "No," I said. "He can come in, but only long enough to hear me. Then he leaves." Richard understood. "I'll send Patricia to the door." When Daniel came in, he looked smaller than he had at the shower, smaller than he had at the ultrasound, smaller than I had ever seen him. The roses were still in his hand, but the stems were bent now. His face had the gray, stunned look of a man who has moved from anger to fear and has not yet found the floor under either one. He stopped just inside the door and looked from me to the babies. "I came as soon as I could." That was almost funny. Almost. "You mean after the cards failed?" I asked, his jaw tightened. "Or after your father told you no?" He swallowed. "Alina, please." "No." I kept my voice even. "You don't get to bring panic into this room and call it love." He flinched, just slightly, as if I had slapped him with the truth instead of my hand. "I know about Starbucks," I said. "I know about the car. I know your father read the file. I know the board shut you out before you got here. And I know you are standing in my doorway because you thought the worst thing waiting for you today was me." He looked at me then, and I could see the moment his brain started trying to reassemble the story into something survivable. It failed. "That wasn't supposed to happen," he said. I laughed once, softly. "No, it was." He took a step forward, then stopped when Patricia appeared at the door like a guardian in scrubs. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. I kept my eyes on Daniel. "The thing you need to understand," I said, "is that I am not fighting for the version of this marriage you thought you could keep. That version is gone. So are the accounts. So is the access. So is the life where you could spend family money on another woman and then come home and kiss your children like nothing happened." His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I love you," he said. I looked at him for a long moment. "I know, and you still did it." That was the hardest sentence in the room, because it stripped the performance off every excuse he had left. Love was not the issue. It had never been the issue. The issue was what he believed love entitled him to do. He turned red then, and then pale, the way men do when they realize they cannot charm their way out of consequence. "I made a mistake." "No," I said. "You made a pattern." His eyes flicked to the folder, then back to me. "I can fix this." "You can't." "I can." I let that sit for a beat. "Daniel," I said, "you can't unspend the money. You can't unlive the nights. You can't unsee the photographs. You can't unmake the fact that while I was on my kitchen floor, bringing our daughters into this world, you were in an apartment paid for by the company your father built." His face changed again, this time with something like terror. "Please." I shook my head. "I'm done begging you to understand." He stared at me, and for the first time, maybe ever, he had nothing useful to say. That silence told me more than any confession could have. I shifted Harper gently in my arms, kissed the top of her head, and then looked at Hazel. The room had grown very still. "Here is what happens now," I said. "You will leave this hospital. You will not argue with me. You will not wake the babies. You will not ask me to comfort you. You will go because I am choosing peace for my daughters, and your panic is not welcome in it." His eyes shone. He blinked hard. He was trying not to fall apart in front of Patricia. "Too late. You can see them later," I added. "When there's a plan and a lawyer, and somebody who isn't trying to use my labor room as a place to negotiate his conscience." He looked past me then, toward the bassinets, toward the girls, toward the life he had almost mistaken for permanent. And I saw it. The first real understanding, not regret, not yet, understanding, that he had lost the room, not the marriage, not the money, the room, the place where he still had access to me, the place where I had once made excuses for him because I thought love meant being patient with a man who had not yet grown up. It was gone. I pointed to the door. "Go." He didn't move. Patricia did not have to touch him. She only straightened up behind him, and that was enough. A woman in scrubs can say more with posture than some men can with a 5-minute speech. Daniel finally stepped back. He picked up the roses from the floor where they had fallen and held them like something already dead. At the threshold he turned, just once. "Alina, no," I said again, softer this time. "Not here, not now." His face folded in on itself, then he left. Patricia shut the door behind him and locked it. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. Harper stirred. Hazel blinked, and the silence that followed was not empty. It was mine. I looked down at my daughters, at their tiny fists, at the fragile certainty of them, and I knew that every decision from this point forward would be made with them in the middle of it, not on the edge. Not Daniel's shame, not Meredith's breakdown, not Richard's guilt, not Diane's heartbreak. Mine. The board was moving. The money was frozen. The family had started to split along the fault line I had revealed. And somewhere in Charlotte, my husband had just learned that the door he had been walking through for years was no longer his door at all. He thought the worst thing waiting for him was me. It wasn't. It was the truth finally moving faster than he could lie. 2 years later, the people who betrayed me were gone from my life, and I was finally able to say the ledger balanced. I wrote that sentence in my notebook on a Thursday night while Harper was doing homework at the kitchen island. And Hazel was arguing with her sister over a purple marker that had definitely rolled under the refrigerator at some point in the past hour. The house was warm, the dishwasher was humming. Somebody on the street was letting a car door slam too hard, and somewhere upstairs one of the girls was laughing at a cartoon, like the whole world was made for laughter and not damage. That was when it hit me. Not that I had survived it. I knew that already. What hit me was that I no longer lived inside the version of my life that had been built to hide the truth. That life was gone. Daniel was gone from the company, gone from the apartment at the Ellsworth, gone from the fantasy that blood would always buy him forgiveness. He had learned, slowly and painfully, that consequences do not care how charming you were at a dinner table 5 years ago. They arrive anyway. They arrive especially for men who think they are exempt. He never came back to Carter and Vance. Not really. Not in title, not in power, not in the way his last name used to open doors before he even reached for the handle. The father who once covered for him had become the father who would no longer protect him from himself. Richard did not destroy him out of cruelty. That would have been easier to understand. Richard withdrew the only thing he had ever mistaken for love, access without accountability. Daniel had to learn how to live without the cushion. That was the humiliation of it. Not the headlines, not the rumors, not the board meeting. It was the ordinary, grinding fact of a man who had once signed expense reports with a family card, now counting out his own money in silence. It was the apartment off Sugar Creek with the refrigerator that rattled at night. It was the second-hand furniture. It was the job he took because nobody at the office cared who his father was. It was learning to stand in line like everybody else and wait for a coffee he had to pay for himself. He got sober eventually. I do not say that lightly, and I do not say it like it fixed anything. It did not erase what he had done. It did not rebuild my trust. It did not make him the father I would have chosen for my daughters if I had been given a clean page. Sobriety was just the first honest thing he had ever chosen without an audience. He saw Harper and Hazel under supervision at first. Quiet rooms, clipboards. A woman at the edge of the space making sure everybody stayed safe, emotionally and otherwise. The girls were toddlers then, old enough to notice tone, old enough to know when an adult was trying to be careful and failing. Harper asked questions. Hazel watched first, then decided whether she trusted the answer. Daniel did not know how to be with them at the beginning. He talked too much, then not enough. He tried to perform warmth and learned that children can smell performance faster than adults can. Over time he got quieter. Better, maybe, but quiet is not the same thing as repaired. Still, I noticed he never lied to them in the room. He understood finally that the truth was the only currency he had left that might not be counterfeit. I did not hate him. That surprised people. I did not love him anymore either. Not in the way a wife loves a husband she believes is building a shared future. What I felt was beneath than either of those things. It was grief without pleading. It was the knowledge that the man I married had never been a man who could be counted on, and that admitting that truth did not destroy me. It clarified me. Meredith vanished from the life she once lived, like a woman stepping backward through a curtain no one would ever lift for her again. At first there were calls, then messages, then a letter in that careful handwriting she used when she wanted to sound harmless. I read the first page, and I knew at once that the woman writing it still thought the problem was misunderstanding. That was the most insulting part. She wanted me to collaborate in a softer version of what she had done. I didn't. I wrote return to sender on the envelope and mailed it back. That was the whole reply. By the time the stories moved through Charlotte's social circles and the country club stopped pretending not to notice, Meredith was already losing everything that had once made her feel safe. The invitations, the lunches, the easy callbacks, the women who had leaned into her at baby showers and charity events and whispered, "You always know the right thing to say." What they meant was, "You always know how to sound like one of us." When that spell broke, nobody reached for her. Not her friends. Not the women whose houses she had decorated. Not the mothers who had laughed with her over champagne. and then turned their faces away once the truth had a name. She left the Ellsworth. She moved into a smaller place with walls that were too thin and furniture that didn't match her life anymore. She worked retail after that, folding expensive clothes for women who used to sit across from her at brunch and never once imagined that someday she would be the one behind the register. That is not revenge. Revenge would have required my attention. This was simply consequence. Diane never took Meredith back into the center of the family. That was the hardest mercy she ever gave her daughter. I know because Diane and I learned how to speak afterward, slowly, carefully, like two women standing on opposite sides of the same fire. She called on Wednesdays. Richard called on Sundays. I did not call either of them first. That was part of the rebuilding too, understanding that my life did not have to become a constant emergency to prove I was strong. I stopped living like every day had to be a test I could pass by bleeding less than I did yesterday. I went back to work full-time. I took the promotions when they came. I stopped apologizing for being exact. I bought a house that fit my daughters and not my fear. I put real art on the walls instead of the kind of blank decor people choose when they are pretending to be temporary. I learned how to make a room feel lived in without making it look like I was waiting for permission to exist. And I learned something even more important than success. I learned that peace is not passive. Peace is built. It is built in the uncomfortable hours when no one is watching, and you are the only one checking the numbers, reading the dates, noticing the missing receipts, noticing the shift in tone, noticing the perfume that does not belong on your husband's collar. Peace is not a feeling. It is a practice. You make it by refusing to gaslight yourself. That was the lesson I kept coming back to. Intuition is not irrational just because it is early. That is what so many women get wrong about themselves. They think the first warning is paranoia because nobody else can see it yet. But your body knows before your pride is ready. Your mind notices the pattern before your social conditioning lets you name it. You are not crazy because the truth has not fully arrived. You are early, and being early can save your life. Quiet women are not weak women. Quiet women are women who have already started gathering evidence, while everyone else is still enjoying the performance. Quiet women are the ones who remember the timestamps, the mileage, the smell on the shirt collar, the way a voice went strange on the phone. Quiet women are the ones who understand that preparation is power. That's the part nobody likes to say out loud. Real power does not always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like a folder in a drawer. Sometimes it looks like a lawyer on the phone before dawn. Sometimes it looks like a grandmother deciding the family pattern is ending with her, even if it costs her the child she thought she knew. Sometimes it looks like a woman sitting in a hospital room with newborn twins and choosing not to scream because she is saving her breath for what comes next. What came next for me was not glamorous. It was school lunches and pediatric appointments and invoices and bedtime stories, and a life held together by routine, honesty, and the kind of love that doesn't demand applause. Harper grew into fire. Hazel grew into stillness. Harper was all motion and laughter and bright opinions. Hazel watched first, always, and then said the one sentence in the room that everyone else should have thought to say. They are both brave now. Not because nothing happened to them, because something happened, and they are being raised by a woman who refuses to let betrayal become their inheritance. I told them the truth in age-appropriate pieces as they got older, not the ugly details too soon, not the silent version either. I told them that adults sometimes make choices that hurt the people who love them. I told them that the hurt is never the child's fault. I told them that a promise is only as strong as the person making it. And I told them, as often as they needed to hear it, that their job was never to shrink themselves to keep other people comfortable. By then Patricia had long since retired from the hospital, but she still sent a Christmas card every year with a handwritten note in the corner that said, "Keep breathing, baby girl." I kept every single one. I sent one back. She was one of the reasons I survived the first night, and one of the reasons I remembered who I was after it. People ask me sometimes what changed my life. They want a dramatic answer. The hospital room, the folder, the father, the money, the collapse. But none of those things changed me as much as the months before them did. The months when I already knew. The months when I chose not to make myself small around the truth. The months when I trusted the evidence instead of the story I was being sold. That is where a woman's life is often decided. Not in the explosion, but in the quiet, in the doubt, in the noticing. In the moment she decides whether she will betray herself just to keep the peace. I won't do that anymore. I sit at my kitchen table now, with the twins on either side of me, and I open the ledger at the end of the month the way some people open a prayer book. Not because I worship numbers, but because numbers remind me that truth has a shape. It has balance. It has consequence. It does not beg. It does not flatter. It just is. One column for what was taken. One column for what survived. One column for what I built after both. The girls, the house, the work, the friends who stayed. The family that learned, finally, how to love without enabling. The woman I became when I stopped asking for permission to trust myself. That is the balance. That is the part nobody can steal back. So if you are watching this, and there is a small voice in you that keeps whispering that something is off, listen to it. Don't insult it. Don't rush to silence it because other people would prefer your discomfort stay private. Don't call yourself dramatic just because your body got there before your mind did. And if there was a Patricia in your life, someone who held your hand, or opened a door, or gave you a look that said, "I believe you," before you had proof, keep her name somewhere sacred. Because every woman who survives betrayal survives it twice. Once because she sees it, and once because somebody meets her in the middle of it and reminds her she is not alone. Who was that person for you? And what did you know before you were willing to say it out loud?